Britain's daring gamble. In 1788, Britain embarked on an ambitious and unprecedented endeavor, establishing a penal colony on the faraway continent of Australia. This decision, shaped by economic, social, and geopolitical factors, marked the beginning of the colonization of Australia and had profound consequences for the indigenous populations, British society, and global geopolitics. At its heart, this daring gamble represented a blend of desperation, ambition, and pragmatism, a moment that reshaped the world. The context behind the gamble: by the late 18th century, Britain faced significant challenges that necessitated bold action. The most immediate concern was the overcrowding of British prisons. The Industrial Revolution had brought about rapid urbanization, resulting in increased poverty and crime. British prisons were overflowing, and hulks, decommissioned ships used as makeshift jails, were a temporary but inadequate solution. Adding to the crisis was the loss of the American colonies in 1783 following the Revolutionary War, which had been Britain's primary destination for transporting convicts. Without a suitable alternative, the British government was forced to find a new location for its burgeoning criminal population. Economic pressures also played a role. Britain's growing empire required strategic trade routes and access to resources. The Pacific region, largely unexplored by Europeans at the time, offered opportunities to expand trade, particularly with China and the East Indies. Establishing a presence in Australia would provide a foothold in the region, complementing Britain's naval dominance and opening up new commercial prospects. Geopolitical considerations further influenced the decision. The European powers of the late 18th century were engaged in fierce competition for global dominance. France, under King Louis XVI, had shown interest in the Pacific, sending explorers like La Pérouse to chart the region. A British settlement in Australia would preempt French ambitions, securing the continent for the crown and asserting British influence in a rapidly evolving world order. The First Fleet and the challenges of colonization. In May 1787, the First Fleet set sail from Portsmouth under the command of Captain Arthur Phillip, comprising 11 ships, approximately 1,500 people, including 736 convicts, marines, and officials, embarked on the perilous journey to Australia. After a voyage of 8 months, they arrived at Botany Bay in January 1788. However, the site proved unsuitable due to poor soil and lack of fresh water. The fleet moved north to Port Jackson, where they established the settlement of Sydney Cove on January 26, 1788, a date now commemorated as Australia Day. The challenges of colonization were immense. The settlers faced unfamiliar and often harsh conditions, including extreme weather, unyielding soil, and a lack of agricultural knowledge about the local environment. Supplies brought from Britain dwindled quickly, leading to widespread hunger and disease. Relations with the indigenous Eora people, who had lived in the area for tens of thousands of years, were initially tentative but soon deteriorated into violence as settlers encroached on their land and disrupted their way of life. Despite these challenges, Captain Phillip demonstrated remarkable leadership. He maintained order among the convicts, managed scarce resources, and sought to establish peaceful relations with the indigenous population. His efforts laid the foundation for a colony that, despite its rocky beginnings, would eventually thrive. Impact on indigenous populations. The arrival of the British in 1788 marked the beginning of a catastrophic period for Australia's Aboriginal peoples. The Eora and other indigenous groups were dispossessed of their land. Their food sources were disrupted, and they were exposed to diseases like smallpox, to which they had no immunity. The population decline was staggering. Within decades, entire communities were decimated. Moreover, the British brought with them a legal framework that ignored the existing rights and cultures of the Aboriginal peoples. The doctrine of terra nullius, the idea that the land was unoccupied and therefore available for settlement, became the basis for British claims to sovereignty. This disregard for indigenous land rights and cultural heritage had lasting repercussions, laying the groundwork for centuries of inequality and marginalization. Economic and strategic benefits for Britain, the colonization of Australia was a calculated risk that paid off in unexpected ways. Initially seen as little more than a prison outpost, the colony began to show potential as a site for agricultural and economic development. By the early 19th century, free settlers were arriving in increasing numbers, attracted by the promise of land and opportunity. Sheep farming and wool production soon became major industries, laying the foundation for Australia's modern economy. Strategically, Australia became a crucial part of Britain's global empire. Its location in the Pacific allowed the British to project power in the region and facilitated trade with Asia. During the 19th century, the colony's ports played a vital role in the movement of goods and people, further integrating Australia into the global economy. Legacy and reflection. The decision to colonize Australia in 1788 was undoubtedly a daring gamble. For Britain, it addressed pressing domestic concerns and bolstered its imperial ambitions. For the settlers, it represented a chance for a new beginning, albeit fraught with hardship. Yet for Australia's Indigenous peoples, it was the beginning of an era of dispossession, cultural disruption, and suffering. The legacy of 1788 continues to shape Australia's national identity. The date itself remains contentious, with many Australians, particularly Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, viewing it as a day of mourning rather than celebration. Efforts to reconcile this history through acknowledgement of past injustices and the pursuit of Indigenous rights are ongoing. In hindsight, Britain's gamble on the other side of the world was more than just a solution to a penal crisis. It was a pivotal moment in the story of global colonization, one that underscored the complexities and consequences of empire building. The events of 1788 remind us that history is never straightforward. What was a bold step forward for one nation was a devastating blow for another. Understanding this dual legacy is essential to appreciating the full scope of this transformative chapter in human history. This essay provides a comprehensive analysis of Britain's decision to establish a penal colony in Australia, highlighting its causes, challenges, and enduring impacts. If you liked our informative videos, then please subscribe my channel Era Link.